Hello, my name is Steve Mastel, and I'm an electrician at Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Bremerton, Washington. At the shipyard, we primarily repair submarines and aircraft carriers for the Navy. And today, I'm here to introduce you to a non-Newtonian fluid called Oobleck. So, non-Newtonian fluid. That sounds pretty intimidating. What exactly is a non-Newtonian fluid? So first of all, a fluid is a substance that flows to fill up the space that it is put into. So that means it's either a liquid or a gas. So you're familiar with the three states of matter: solid, liquid, or gas. The main difference between those things is how they fill up a space. This is the difference that you can see the most easily. And a solid is like ice. So ice is a solid because when you put ice into a container, it keeps its own shape. It stays the shape it was. It doesn't matter what container you put it into. It stays the same shape and it occupies the same space. So it's solid like a rock. And a liquid, so if you melt that ice, it turns into water, and water is a liquid. And a liquid will flow to fill up the container that you put it into. It flows to fill up the space. But a liquid has to stay together. So it only fills up the bottom of the space because of gravity. And then if you take that water and you boil it, it becomes steam or water vapor. And that's like a gas. So that will flow to fill up the space, but it will fill up the entire space. It doesn't have to stay together. So it will fill the entire space. So a fluid is either a liquid or a gas. And Sir Isaac Newton said that a fluid flows with viscosity. And viscosity is how easily a fluid flows. So we say that water is thin and it flows very easily, so it has a low viscosity. But we say that syrup is thick. It doesn't flow so easily. It has a high viscosity. And Sir Isaac Newton's idea was that fluids flow depending on their temperature. And that makes sense. If you heat up some syrup, it's going to flow more easily. It's going to thin out. And that does. It makes perfect sense. But a lot of fluids are not temperature sensitive in that way. And those fluids are called non-Newtonian fluids. And the non-Newtonian fluid Oobleck that we're going to make today changes its viscosity by the addition or subtraction of pressure. A change in pressure changes the viscosity of this non-Newtonian fluid. So let's get started. The first thing you're going to need is a space that you can keep clean. You notice I have a paper towel under my container. That's going to help keep my space clean. Oobleck is made out of cornstarch and water, so it's pretty easy to clean up, and we'll talk about that at the end of the video. But it's good to protect your surfaces and things of this nature. Then we're going to need a container. It doesn't have to be a container with a lid like the one that I have, but a disposable container with a lid makes cleanup a little easier. It just needs to be big enough to hold the oobleck that you're making and easy enough to get your fingers in there so you can manipulate the oobleck and play with it. Then we're going to need cornstarch and water. 2 parts of cornstarch, 1 part of water. So I'm going to start today with 1 cup of cornstarch. So I have my cup of cornstarch, and I'm going to put it in my container. And then I'm going to need, for that 1 cup of cornstarch, 1, 2 to 1, I'm going to need about a half a cup of water. But I'm going to add my water slowly. This cup here is 1.25 ounces, which is about 2 tablespoons or 1/8 of a cup. So I'm going to need 4 of these to make my half a cup of water. But I'm going to add them 1 at a time. I have my water here. It's better if your water is cold. Cold water, you definitely do not want warm water. Room temperature or cold water. So I'm going to start with 1 small cup of water, and I'm going to stir that into my cornstarch to make sure that all of the water gets used up. And it's going to make that cornstarch kind of hard. But I want to be careful with my spoon because that hard cornstarch is going to stick to my container, and I don't want to fling it all over the place. So I'm just stirring that in, make sure that all of the water gets used up, and I'm using the front of my spoon to break up those clumps. And once all of that water gets used up, I'm going to add another small cup of water. So I have my second small cup of water, just dump it right in there. And now I'm going to take this cornstarch that's loose, and I'm going to make sure that it gets put up into the water. Now again, I want to use I use my spoon, and I'm being very careful to dig underneath and lift gently on my cornstarch. You don't have to use a spoon. If you feel like it's more difficult, just get in there with your fingers and you can pick this up and you can see it looks pretty solid. Break it up with your fingers and stir it up and make sure, see, there you go. Make sure that you don't get your cornstarch all over the place. And you want to try and get all of the dry cornstarch mixed up. But if you can't, that's okay, because we're going to add some more water. But it's kind of interesting that now my cornstarch is sticking together into a more solid form with the water that I've put in there. And I can crumble that up and make it smaller if I like. It doesn't really matter at this point. So I'm going to add another cup of water. Here's my third small cup of water, and my oobleck should start to be a little bit more liquid. And I'm going to stir it very carefully as I go along. Again, I like to use the spoon. You don't have to. If you want to use your fingers and break these things up and get that all mixed up, that's great. If you have really liquid places, just move some of that cornstarch into those really liquid places so that it's all starting to get mixed up together. I kind of like this, adding just little bits of water at a time, because I get to see how this morphs, how it changes as we go through the process. And again, I'm starting to get a little bit more clay-like. It's not quite as crumbly. It's starting to act a little bit more like clay. So we're almost there. I can see in certain places where it starts to look like it's going to flow if I manipulate it with the spoon. And that's coming to what Oobleck is going to look like. So I'll put my 4th cup. That should be the last of the water, but I want to adjust as I go along and see how that all works. I'm going to work for a certain consistency of this Oobleck. Consistency is how it pours off the spoon, how it feels. And I'm just going to mix this all up. The better I mix it, I don't want to have any really liquid places or any really solid places. I want it all to be the same viscosity, or how it flows. It's all going to flow the same. So I want to, this is where I really want to make sure that my stirring is consistent. And this might be a good place to really get in there with your fingers and move things around, because I can pick it up and put it onto the places where I have much more liquid water. And I just grab pieces of it, and if you look, you can see here, this is pretty good consistency here, where as I continue to manipulate it, it stays pretty solid, but as soon as I stop changing the pressure, it just flows. So that's pretty good. And I'm just going to make sure that it all feels the same, that all of my water gets incorporated, all of my cornstarch. I want to try and make it all the same consistency, all the same amount of wet. So this is where it's kind of starting to get fun. I'm getting closer and closer to Oobleck here. I have, as long as I'm changing the pressure, it stays solid. When I tear the pressure, it cleaves. You can see it breaks just like a cracker. It breaks like a cracker, and then it turns liquid. And it'll flow a little bit as it goes along. A little bit more water. And I'm mixing with my fingers to get things nice and set. So here, this is about the consistency that I'm looking for. So when I drag my fingers through, you see it breaks. I can feel it be solid in the front of my fingers, and it breaks, and then it flows back into space. I can do the same thing with the spoon. If I pull the spoon through hard, it feels like it builds up solid in front, and then it just flows away as I stop moving the spoon. It's the change in pressure that changes the viscosity of this. So here, you can see, if I tap it with my fingers, I'm not splashing, and my fingers are barely going into it. And the harder I hit it with my fingers, the less my fingers go in. But if I set them there, they just drop right in like, and then it's going to stick to my fingers. If I pull them out quickly, it'll lift the whole tub. I don't want to lift it really high because then it'll fall and spill, but it lifts the whole tub. Or if I hold the tub, when I pull them out, you can hear it stick, and some of it'll be there, and then it flows away. Here, again, as long as I'm changing the pressure and keep it moving, it stays relatively solid. But as soon as I stop changing the pressure, it turns back into a liquid. More flow. So I can see that change in pressure, change in viscosity from pressure pretty easily by bouncing this golf ball on my Oobleck. See it bounce? The harder I throw it, the better it bounces. And then it sinks. It bounces first, and then it sinks. So that's a non-Newtonian fluid. It flows, but it doesn't splash. So cleanup. Cleanup is pretty easy. You can see that as it dries, it turns back into cornstarch, becomes very, so if it gets on your carpet or on your on anything cloth, just let it dry, and then you can vacuum up the cornstarch pretty easily. A very strong word of warning: do not ever put this Oobleck down your drain. It doesn't matter how much water you put behind it, it will clog your pipes, and that's not a good thing. To dispose of the Oobleck, if you have a disposable container with a lid, simply put the lid on and throw it in the trash. If you don't have a disposable container, or you want to keep your container, you can scrape the Oobleck out into, get somebody to help, scrape it out into a sealable bag and seal the bag, throw it away. Or you can leave it, just leave it out overnight, open, no cover, and the water will evaporate out and it will turn into a kind of a solid brick that you can easily throw away. So that's our project with non-Newtonian fluid, Oobleck. Thanks for coming out today. I hope you had some fun, and I hope you learned some things. We'll see you next time.